What if I told you, the moment you stop trying to be chosen is the exact moment she starts treating you differently? Not because you changed your clothes, not because you learned better lines, but because you made one internal move that most people never make. Stay with me, because by the end of this speech, you'll understand why chasing kills attraction and how a single shift in your behavior can quietly flip the power dynamic in your favor. Most people misunderstand attraction at a very fundamental level. They believe attraction grows the more they give, the more they show up, the more they adjust, and the more they prove their worth. So they overextend, they over-communicate, they over-prioritize, and what they don't realize is that while effort can build familiarity, it rarely builds desire. Attraction is not a reward for hard work. It is a response to how someone experiences themselves around you. And that experience is shaped far more by your self-respect than by your effort. Self-respect is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention or validation. It quietly governs your behavior. It decides what you tolerate, what you respond to, and what you walk away from. When someone has self-respect, they do not rush to fill silence. They do not chase reassurance. They do not sacrifice their emotional stability just to stay connected. And this creates a psychological contrast that effort alone never can. Because effort says, please choose me. Self-respect says, I am choosing myself and you're welcome to meet me here. When someone senses that your mood, your confidence, and your sense of self are not dependent on how they treat you, the dynamic changes. There is less emotional leverage over you. And paradoxically, that lack of leverage is what creates attraction. People are drawn to emotional steadiness because it feels safe, rare, and grounded. When you are not constantly trying to secure your place in someone's life, you communicate that your life already has structure, meaning, and fulfillment. You stop auditioning. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop trying to earn basic respect. And that absence of desperation is felt immediately, even if nothing about your words has changed. The problem is that many people confuse self-respect with indifference. They think respecting yourself means being cold, distant, or unavailable. That is not self-respect. That is fear disguised as control. True self-respect is warm but firm, open but not needy, present but not attached to outcomes. It means you can enjoy someone deeply without losing yourself in the process. It means you don't abandon your routines, your values, or your boundaries just to maintain closeness. You don't become smaller to be more acceptable. You don't become quieter to avoid conflict. You don't become more agreeable to be liked. Effort without self-respect looks like over-explaining, over-apologizing, and over-functioning emotionally. It looks like always being the one to fix the mood, smooth the tension, or restore connection. And while this may keep someone around, it slowly erodes attraction because it removes polarity. There is no mystery in someone who is always available. There is no intrigue in someone who has no limits. There is no desire in someone who is emotionally predictable because they are always accommodating. Self-respect reintroduces polarity by reminding the other person that access to you is not unconditional. When you respect yourself, you naturally slow down. You don't rush intimacy. You don't force momentum. You allow people to reveal how they treat you without immediately intervening. And in that space, people either step up or they don't. This is where attraction clarifies itself, because someone who values you responds to your self-respect with more care, more consistency, and more intention. Someone who only enjoyed the benefits of your effort responds with distance, confusion, or subtle resistance. And that information is valuable. It saves you from investing in situations where your effort would only ever be taken for granted. Self-respect also changes how conflict is handled. Instead of reacting emotionally or trying to prove your point, you respond from clarity. You state what works for you and what doesn't without dramatizing it. You don't threaten to leave and you don't beg someone to stay. You trust that your standards are reasonable and you allow the other person to choose how they respond. This calm certainty is deeply attractive because it signals emotional maturity. It tells the other person that connection with you is stable but not permissive, secure but not careless. Attraction grows in the presence of self-respect because self-respect creates emotional gravity. It makes people lean in instead of leaning back. It makes them more aware of their behavior, more conscious of their choices, more intentional in how they show up. Not because you demanded it, but because your energy requires it. You are no longer negotiating your value through effort. You are embodying it through consistency, boundaries, and self-alignment. And when someone realizes that you will not abandon yourself to keep them, they are forced to decide how much they truly value being in your life. Over-availability is often misunderstood as kindness, commitment, or emotional maturity, when in reality it is usually fear wearing a polite mask. It is the fear of losing connection, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of not being chosen. So people stay constantly reachable. They reply instantly. They rearrange their schedules. They make themselves emotionally present at all times, even when it costs them rest, dignity, or clarity. And they call it effort. But what it actually communicates is that your time, energy, and attention are endlessly accessible. And anything that is endlessly accessible slowly loses its value. When someone knows you will always be there, no matter how inconsistent they are, the dynamic quietly shifts. They don't have to be intentional because there is no consequence for being careless. They don't have to prioritize because you already have. They don't have to reflect on their behavior because you absorb the discomfort for them. Over-availability removes the need for effort from the other side. An attraction cannot survive in a space where only one person is emotionally invested. The issue is not availability itself. Healthy connection requires presence, responsiveness, and care. The issue is availability without boundaries, availability that is not chosen but compulsive, availability that exists to prevent abandonment rather than to deepen connection. When you are always available, you are silently telling someone that your life is on pause until they decide what they want from you. That message is felt even if it is never spoken, and it places you in a position where you are waiting rather than living, reacting rather than leading your own emotional experience. Over-availability also distorts power, not power in a manipulative sense, but psychological balance. Relationships need reciprocity to stay alive. When one person is always present and the other is optional, the optional one controls the pace, the tone, and the depth of the connection. This doesn't make them a bad person. It simply means humans adapt to the environment they are in. If effort is not required, effort is not given. If your presence is guaranteed, it stops being protected. And once presence is no longer protected, it stops being cherished. Many people believe that being constantly available will make someone feel secure. But security does not come from unlimited access. It comes from reliability paired with self-respect. You can be consistent without being constantly reachable. You can care deeply without centering your entire emotional rhythm around another person. When you choose when to be available instead of being available by default, your presence carries intention. It feels deliberate rather than automatic, and deliberate presence is far more attractive than constant presence. There is also a hidden cost to over-availability that people rarely acknowledge: resentment. When you repeatedly show up more than feels natural to you, when you suppress your needs to remain agreeable, when you give more time than you can genuinely afford, something inside you keeps score. Even if you never express it, your energy changes. You become subtly frustrated, less authentic, less open. And the other person feels that shift without knowing why. What started as overgiving eventually turns into emotional distance, not because the other person changed, but because you abandoned yourself to keep them close. Healthy availability requires self-trust. It requires knowing that stepping back will not make you invisible, and if it does, that connection was never stable to begin with. When you are not constantly available, you allow space for curiosity to grow. You allow the other person to feel your absence, not as punishment, but as reality. Absence creates perspective. It allows people to notice how you contribute to their emotional world. And when someone notices your absence, they begin to notice your value. Over-availability also prevents discernment. If you are always present, you never get to observe how someone behaves when you are not carrying the connection. You never see whether they initiate, reflect, or adjust on their own. Space reveals intention. Distance reveals priorities. And when you remove space entirely, you remove your ability to see the truth of the dynamic. You stay busy maintaining something that may not be mutual, convincing yourself that effort will eventually be returned. Choosing not to be over-available is not about withdrawal or silence. It is about rhythm. It is about allowing your life to remain full, textured, and self-directed. It is about responding, not hovering, engaging, not orbiting. When you stop making yourself endlessly accessible, you don't become less caring, and you become more grounded. And grounded energy is what invites respect, curiosity, and genuine interest, because it signals that connection with you is something that exists alongside your life, not instead of it. Human behavior is deeply shaped by perception, not intention. It doesn't matter how kind you are, how loyal you are, or how much potential you see in someone. What determines how you are treated is how replaceable you appear in their emotional world. And this is where most people get it wrong. They try to secure connection by proving permanence, by signaling that they are not going anywhere, by reassuring the other person that no matter what happens, they will stay. They believe this will create safety, but instead it often removes urgency, because when someone feels there is nothing to lose, they stop protecting what they have. Value is not created through possession. It is created through the awareness of loss. This is not cruelty, it is psychology. People take care of what they know they could lose access to. They pay attention to what feels fragile. They become intentional when something matters. When your presence is guaranteed regardless of how you are treated, it stops feeling earned. And when it stops feeling earned, it stops being respected. This is why inconsistency often appears in relationships where one person has made themselves emotionally irreplaceable in the worst way by staying no matter what. Feeling like you could lose someone does not mean living in fear or anxiety. It means recognizing that connection has conditions, healthy ones, conditions like respect, consistency, and emotional responsibility. When those conditions exist, closeness grows naturally. When they don't, distance becomes necessary. And the moment you are willing to create that distance when your standards are not met, the dynamic shifts. Not because you threatened or manipulated, but because your presence is no longer unconditional in the face of disregard. People subconsciously track consequences. If someone cancels on you repeatedly and nothing changes, your time loses weight. If someone speaks to you carelessly and the connection remains intact, your emotional boundaries dissolve. But when behavior has impact, when access changes in response to how you are treated, awareness increases. The other person becomes more present, more reflective, more careful. because now something is at stake. And when something is at stake, value becomes visible. This is where many people confuse self-respect with strategy. They think creating the possibility of loss means pulling away to provoke fear. But real value is not created by theatrics. It is created by alignment. When you consistently live in alignment with your standards, loss becomes a natural consequence rather than a manufactured one. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to warn anyone. Your behavior communicates everything. Reduced access, reduced availability, reduced emotional investment, all done calmly without bitterness. When someone realizes that they could lose access to you, they begin to reassess their behavior. Not everyone, but the ones capable of healthy connection. They ask themselves whether they are showing up fully, whether they are matching effort, whether they are taking you for granted. And if they are not willing to do that work, the distance remains. Which is not a failure, it is clarity. Because someone who only values you when you are always there never valued you, only the convenience you provided. The awareness of loss also restores balance. It brings the dynamic back to mutual choice instead of silent obligation. You are not staying because you are afraid to be alone. You are staying because the connection meets your standards, and the other person stays for the same reason. This mutuality is where attraction stabilizes, because now both people are choosing each other, not out of fear, but out of recognition. When people feel they can lose you, they treat moments with you differently. They listen more closely. They become more intentional with their words. They stop assuming and start appreciating, not because you demanded it, but because your presence has boundaries. And boundaries are what turn attention into respect and respect into desire. Most people believe they communicate their needs through conversations. They explain how they feel, they clarify what hurt them, they articulate what they want more of and less of. And while communication is important, it is rarely what actually changes behavior. What changes behavior is consequence. And consequence is delivered through boundaries, not explanations. Boundaries are the behaviors you adjust when your standards are not met. They are not threats, ultimatums, or emotional reactions. They are quiet decisions that reveal what you will and will not participate in. Words can be ignored, debated, or misunderstood. Boundaries cannot. When someone sees that access to you changes based on how they treat you, the message is clear without being spoken. This is why boundaries are louder than words. You can tell someone you value respect 100 times, but if you stay present when they disrespect you, your behavior contradicts your message. People believe what you do, not what you say. And when your actions consistently reinforce your standards, your presence starts to carry authority. Boundaries are often misunderstood as harsh or selfish. In reality, they are an act of self-clarity. They define where you end and where the other person begins. Without boundaries, relationships become blurred, roles become confusing, expectations become unspoken but heavy. And in that confusion, resentment grows. Boundaries prevent resentment by making responsibility visible. They allow each person to take ownership of their behavior rather than relying on the other to absorb discomfort. One of the most powerful things about boundaries is that they remove the need for constant emotional labor. You don't have to repeatedly explain why something hurts you. You don't have to convince someone to care. You don't have to monitor their reactions. You simply adjust your engagement. If communication is inconsistent, you stop over-investing. If respect is missing, you reduce access. If effort is one-sided, you step back. These shifts communicate far more clearly than long conversations ever could. People often fear boundaries because they worry they will push others away. But boundaries don't push the right people away. They filter out the wrong ones. Someone who respects you will adjust. They may not like the boundary, but they will understand it. Someone who benefits from your lack of boundaries will resist, minimize, or guilt you. And that resistance is information. It tells you who was invested in you as a person and who was invested in the access you provided. Boundaries also create emotional safety. When you know you will protect yourself, you can relax. You can be open without being naive. You can be warm without being permissive. This emotional safety is felt by others. It creates a sense of structure and reliability. People feel more grounded around those who know where they stand. Unclear boundaries create anxiety. Clear boundaries create stability. Another important aspect of boundaries is consistency. A boundary that is enforced sometimes but not others becomes confusing. It teaches people that your standards are flexible under pressure. Consistent boundaries, on the other hand, build trust. They show that your values are not dependent on mood or fear. They make your presence predictable in the healthiest way. Others learn how to treat you because you have shown them through repetition. Boundaries also return dignity to your silence. When you stop over-explaining and start acting, silence becomes meaningful. It is no longer passive. It is intentional. It signals self-respect rather than withdrawal. You are not disappearing to provoke a reaction. You are stepping back because something no longer aligns, and alignment is the foundation of healthy attraction. When boundaries are in place, dynamics become cleaner. There is less confusion, less emotional chaos, less unspoken tension. People either rise to meet you or they fade away. Both outcomes are useful because boundaries are not meant to control others. They are meant to protect your peace. And when your peace is protected, the way people treat you inevitably changes. Emotional control is often mistaken for emotional suppression. People think it means hiding feelings, becoming distant, or acting unaffected. In reality, emotional control is the ability to feel deeply without letting those feelings dictate your behavior. It is the difference between reacting and responding. When you have emotional control, you are not numb, you are grounded. And grounded people create curiosity because they are not easily read, not easily shaken, and not easily predictable. Most people reveal too much, too fast, not because they are open, but because they are anxious. They rush to express how they feel to relieve inner discomfort. They explain their emotions to secure reassurance. They react in the moment to regain control of the dynamic. And while this may feel honest, it often removes intrigue. When someone knows exactly where they stand at all times, there is nothing to lean into, nothing to explore. Emotional control introduces space, and space invites curiosity. Curiosity is born when someone cannot fully predict your emotional response, not in a manipulative way, but in a self-contained way, when you don't immediately react, when you take time before responding, when you don't emotionally escalate every situation, the other person becomes more aware of you. They pay closer attention to your tone, your timing, your presence. Your emotional steadiness becomes something they have to attune to rather than take for granted. Emotional control also prevents emotional overexposure. Overexposure happens when you share every fear, every insecurity, every thought as it arises. While vulnerability is important, it must be paced. Vulnerability without containment can overwhelm a connection. Emotional control allows you to choose what to share and when. It ensures that your emotional world is revealed through trust, not urgency. And when someone realizes that access to your inner world is gradual, they begin to value it more. Another powerful effect of emotional control is that it shifts responsibility. When you don't react impulsively, you don't absorb the emotional consequences of someone else's behavior. You allow them to sit with it. If someone says something careless and you don't immediately smooth it over, they feel the weight of their words. If someone pulls away and you don't chase, they feel the distance they created. Emotional control lets reality teach the lesson instead of you having to explain it. People are naturally curious about what they cannot easily influence. When your emotional state remains steady, regardless of someone else's inconsistency, it creates contrast. They begin to wonder what anchors you, what your life looks like beyond them, what values guide you. That curiosity is not about insecurity, it is about respect. It is the recognition that your emotional center is internal, not dependent on external validation. Emotional control also protects you from emotional bargaining. Without control, people often negotiate connection through reactions, getting upset to be noticed, withdrawing to be chased, overexpressing to be reassured. These patterns exhaust both sides. With emotional control, you don't need to perform your feelings to be taken seriously. Your consistency speaks for you. Your calmness becomes a signal of strength rather than indifference. There is also a quiet confidence that comes with emotional control. You trust yourself to handle discomfort. You don't need immediate resolution. You don't panic in uncertainty. This patience is rare, and rarity creates interest. People feel more drawn to those who are not scrambling for certainty because it suggests inner stability, and inner stability is magnetic. Emotional curiosity grows when someone senses that your emotional world is rich but not chaotic, that you feel but you are not ruled by feeling, that you care but you are not consumed by caring. This balance invites others to lean in slowly, attentively, and respectfully, because they know that closeness with you requires presence, not pressure, and awareness, not emotional force. Choosing yourself is often misunderstood as selfishness, ego, or emotional withdrawal. In reality, it is an internal reorientation. It is the moment you stop organizing your decisions around how someone else might react and start organizing them around what feels aligned, healthy, and sustainable for you. This shift is subtle, but its impact is immediate, because when you choose yourself, your behavior changes, and people respond to behavior long before they respond to words. Before this shift, many people live in a state of quiet self-abandonment. They compromise their needs to avoid tension. They delay their truth to preserve connection. They tolerate confusion because clarity might lead to loss. And while this may keep relationships intact on the surface, it creates inner instability. When you are not choosing yourself, your energy carries hesitation, your presence feels tentative, and others unconsciously sense that you are negotiating your worth in exchange for acceptance. The moment you choose yourself, that negotiation ends. You no longer need to convince, persuade, or overfunction emotionally. You don't chase responses. You don't seek constant reassurance. You don't adjust your standards to match someone else's limitations. This doesn't make you rigid. It makes you clear. And clarity is grounding. It stabilizes your emotional field. You become less reactive, less anxious, less attached to outcomes. That internal stability immediately alters how you show up, even if you never announce the change. People adjust because the rules of engagement have changed. When you choose yourself, you stop accepting half effort, mixed signals, or emotional inconsistency as normal. You respond differently. You take longer to engage. You don't fill gaps that aren't yours to fill. You don't rush to rescue the connection. And this forces others to become more conscious of their behavior. They either rise to meet your level of self-respect or they fall away. Both responses are forms of adjustment. Choosing yourself also restores balance. Relationships thrive on mutual responsibility. When one person carries the emotional weight for both, Imbalance sets in. The other person leans back, not always intentionally, but because they can. When you choose yourself, you return responsibility to where it belongs. You allow silence to exist. You allow discomfort to unfold. You allow the other person to sit with the consequences of their choices. This is not punishment, it is reality. And reality is what prompts growth or departure. Another powerful aspect of choosing yourself is that it removes emotional urgency. You are no longer in a rush to define the connection, secure the future, or control the narrative. You trust that what is meant to align will align without force. This trust creates calm, and calm changes the emotional tone of every interaction. People feel it. They sense that you are not grasping, that you are present by choice, not by fear. That presence carries weight. When you choose yourself, your boundaries become effortless. You don't have to rehearse what to say. You don't need dramatic conversations. Your decisions speak for you. You leave situations that drain you. You invest in what nourishes you. You prioritize your mental and emotional well-being without apology. This consistency teaches others how to treat you because it sets a clear standard, not through demand, but through example. People often fear that choosing themselves will lead to loneliness. What it actually leads to is alignment. Some connections fade because they were built on access rather than respect. Others deepen because they were waiting for you to show up fully in yourself. Either way, the adjustment happens naturally. You don't need to force it. You don't need to explain it. The shift is internal, but the effect is external. And once you experience how differently you are treated when you stop abandoning yourself, it becomes impossible to go back.